We finished doing the stain. We did actually only 2 coats this time, which was much less than we had to do before. I think that was probably because we were using the foam brush and it just leaves so much more stain behind. I just wanted to show you real quick what stain we're using. So this is the Min Wax wood finish and we used the ebony. So then to apply the finish, we're using Min Wax again, Helmsman, and we're using the semi-gloss. We didn't want it to be really shiny and glossy, but we also didn't want a matte finish. We wanted to get a little bit of glow. So, same thing, using the foam brush to apply the finish, and you just put in there, get all the drips off, and what you want to do, it's a little difficult, the finish, because you want it to look perfect, but perfection is hard to achieve. For the first coat and for all coats, you want to put it on thin. You don't want to go back and forth too much, but you want to make sure that you're applying an even layer. And what we've noticed is sometimes when you're working with the foam brush, you'll put it on and then you look back and you can tell that it didn't apply evenly. So I tend to go back over each area at least once just to make sure that it's all applied evenly. And I just go around the edges and then I'll go around the middle. It doesn't matter where you start. And you know, the nature of the foam brush again is that it gets a lot kind of built up in there, so it will kind of pool up in certain areas. So once I've gotten it all applied, I usually just go back around, make sure there's nothing really pooled up. Sometimes the corners get bad, so you just kind of want to pull it out, make sure it looks nice and even. You don't have anything pooled up anywhere. You can see there's like tiny little bubbles in it. Those will just kind of dissolve as it's drying. And what I've noticed is as it starts to dry, certain areas will dry a little faster than others. So you'll look at it in maybe 5 minutes and you'll be like, oh my God, it's not applied evenly. Don't at that point go back and try to put more because you will be able to see that later. It will dry nicely even though it looks like it's drying poorly. Same thing as when you're doing the stain. You wait about 4 to 6 hours before you want to take it to the next level. Just make sure it's completely dry. To be honest, we generally wait at least 24 hours, but that's because we do it one night and then we go to work and come back and do it the next evening when we come home. But that works really well for us, and we have noticed that with staining, if you really let it sit and dry, then the next coat goes on a lot better. So same with the finish. You don't want it to be gooey at all because what you're going to do next is sand it. So that's it, and in 4 to 6 hours we'll come back and show you how to sand after your first coat of finish. So the first coat of finish is dry and it's time to sand it. Between each coat of finish you want to do a light sanding with 220 grit paper, and that's just to get rid of any imperfections, any bubbles that might have dried into the finish, and also to make it so that the next coat of finish will adhere better. And my muscle is going to be doing the sanding.
Alright, so I'm feeling the surface and it's pretty rough. So that's the purpose of sanding, is to make it smooth again and prepare for the next coat. So using 220, lightly sanding. This is one time where I've found that following the grain is not 100% necessary, although if you can, you should. I wouldn't recommend sanding the whole cabinet door against the grain or sanding your project against the grain, but there are definitely times where it's okay. Especially on this first sanding coat, because your next coat of finish is going to blend into all these sanded grooves. And you won't even be able to see them. So after I run over it, I'm running my hand over it to see where there are still rough spots after I sand. And then targeting those. Doesn't have to be glass smooth, but you want it pretty close. Especially important, I would say, on your when you're sanding between your second and your last coat. So that's really your last opportunity to get it as smooth as possible before you apply that last coat. The other benefit, as you can see, is I get dust on my hands, so when you run it on the cabinet, it helps to identify the high spots. So like you can see them right here. You want to be careful on your first round of sanding because the finish is not very thick and you don't want to go through it completely. For the inside of the recess panel here, I just make a couple of light passes initially just to knock down all the high spots, and then I feel it and see what needs more work. Inside of a paneled cabinet like this, cabinet door is the hardest part because the inside edge wants to catch the sandpaper. Makes it kind of a pain. Having the folded edge of your paper up against the inside helps a little bit. Got another piece of sandpaper that's pretty heavily worn, so it's not doing the best job to start, but I like that for the edges. This is where I'm going against the grain because the finish tends to pool up a little bit more right in the edge where you start and stop the brush. So I'm going to run this against the grain down here lightly until I smooth it out. But because the sandpaper is very worn out, it's not as harsh as a brand new sheet. Definitely helps when going against the grain, because you don't want to really cut into the finish. Corners are the hardest part to get. You don't want to overdo it. This is our first coat and our first round of sanding. Like I said, you don't want to go down through the finish because it's light. You just want to get as close to smooth as you can. And then your next coat is inevitably going to have some imperfections as well. You'll hit those with sandpaper between or after that dries. Then on your last coat, you're going to take your time and really try to just go in one direction with your polyurethane, as opposed to going back and forth, which does have a tendency to create bubbles. That's it.